making it a little bit more specific, what are some of the key components in relation to the training that you would incorporate in the strength and conditioning? So you're talking about like aerobic fitness and strength and power and all those kind of things. So what would that in practice look like in a training program?
Well, you have to remember we obviously have the field sessions as well, which are pretty lengthy for the technical, tactical stuff. So for me, always it was how you combined all of that together to get some physiological adaptations and rugby, grow your rugby skill sets,
Yeah.
technical, tactical knowledge. So do that all in one. But so if you were to actually go to early pre-season, you're trying to develop certain physical qualities. So you'd separate them out. So the field-based stuff will probably be more aerobic. Gym-based stuff is more alactic. If you were to actually just separate them early on, you'd say, well, we're not necessarily doing aerobic as in running, 20K.
Yeah.
We're doing aerobic as in probably more like aerobic power. So looking at 5 minute blocks of work and doing your kind of, they call them mass runs, so max aerobic speed shuttles or straight runs.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that you work at a slightly higher percentage of your VO2 max, and you develop aerobic power, but ultimately you are developing the aerobic system on the whole. And then in the gym will be more of your alactic work. So, obviously looking at hypertrophy, strength, power, all of those qualities will probably be sorted out in the gym, because that allows you to get the loads that are required and the intensity that's required to do that there. Mm-hmm. So that's like early pre-season. You would probably split them up, and they'd be very polarized in that sense. And then you'd have to organize your week accordingly to get the most out of each, because you obviously have a bit of interference effect from one to the other, depending on where you put it in the day. So a constant challenge within rugby is, and you can never discount this, you're dealing with people, not not
Machines.
robots, not machines. Yeah. So everybody would love it. You look at if everyone looked at a training day and you look at it from a pure sports science S&C perspective, you'd be like, right, lads, we've got we want to do gym first because we don't want we want the outputs to be really high. But the best time for you to do the gym for strength power is probably closer to midday. So you come in for your first session at midday, do your weights, and it's like, right, but we don't want that to interfere with your aerobic stuff. So we're going to have a 4-hour break, and then we're going to come back at 5 p.m. and dinner time, and then we're going to do all this running work that you're going to absolutely love, and then we'll do that on like some sort of cycle through the week, and then we won't change much of that. We'll do that for months on end until you get to the end point, which is you're incredibly fit, incredibly strong. And they go, well, can't I just do that between like 8 and 10?
yeah. I've got other stuff to do as well.
Actually, yeah, fair enough. So you have to factor in that there is that people are leading lives. There's not actually this kind of like perfect. The perfect plan is the one that's executed the best.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, like how you look at it like that. I guess they technically are hybrid athletes, right? Because they're very cardiovascular fit, but then they're also deadlifting 200 kgs or something as well, which is like exactly what a hybrid athlete would do. And in that preseason time, do you also conduct like any kind of baseline testing as well?
Yeah. So the model that we had at the end was a series of like baseline tests. So we'd have the Bronco test, which is a 1,200 meter shuttle using the rugby marking. So you actually come back 2 meters from the 22, but so you do 20 back, 40 back, 60 back, and you do that 5 times. So that's like roughly a 5-minute test, depending on 4.5 minutes to hopefully 5.5 minutes. Beyond that, everyone's sort of like, yes, come on, mate,
taking too long, mate.
Let's go. So that's your sort of standard aerobic test. What does that tell you? That tells you that they can run at a certain pace for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But it does give you some insight into a few things. One, sort of aerobic efficiency. So can they actually produce energy for 5 minutes continuously without blowing a gasket? Sort of some local muscular endurance aspects as well, which would come into more like running economy, movement economy. So it tells you bits and pieces like that, which is helpful. And then we would also do like a 10 meter we get them on the force plate. Sorry, so they do counter movement jump, uh, like a 10-5, which is like a repeat jump test. So you're looking at one, how much power can you produce, absolutely and relatively. So absolutely, because if you're 140 kilos and you leave the ground, you're having to produce an enormous amount of
That's a
power.
good effort.
Yeah, well done. But if you're, 75 kilos, 80 kilos, or some of the guys might be, then it's very easy to leave the ground, but your absolute power is low, relative power. And then the relative power is like the thing that smooths it out for everyone.
Yeah.
Because you want everyone's relative power to be very, very high. And so you've got that. And then you've got the 10-5, which is a repeat jump test, gives you an idea of elastic properties, a stretch shortening cycle, how they can accept force and then redistribute it and use it efficiently without so much muscular effort.
Yeah.
So that would look at RSI, which is contact time. Ooh, I might get this wrong. Contact time divided by flight time, or flight time divided by
I'll
contact
believe
time.
you. Sounds right to me.
It's one of the two.
Yeah.
So how long you spend on the plate,
Yeah.
and then how long you spend in the air as a result of how long you
Okay.
spend on the plate, and
Yeah,
that gives you an
makes
RSI score. So there's certain bandwidths with that. The elite athletes would be at the top end, obviously, and that's where you're trying to push everyone to. So again, what does that tell you? That tells you how potentially how good they're going to be at storing and using the ground reaction forces, so how much force comes through them, and then also an injury prevention tool as well. Because if you've got terrible RSI, you're obviously using the muscle system, as in eccentric, concentric contractions, to produce force all the time. And and you want to use the passive systems as much as possible. So you want to use tendons that can store and produce elastic energy without using the muscle system, which requires more sort of turnover of like ATP, and obviously you get an actual genuine contraction, lengthening, and then shortening of a muscle to produce force. And that's where injuries potentially come more to the fore.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard it actually explained like that, because I know like plyometric training and spending less time on the ground, like even when you're running and stuff like that, is the way you should be doing it, and that's the good way to do it. But I've never actually heard it explained as to why. But that makes so much sense. If it's not just like an easy, almost like a reaction based thing for your body, you're actually having to actively contract every single time. You could see how that
Yeah,
would over time overload the
yeah,
muscles.
yeah. I don't know if that's just how I view the problem.
Yeah.
Because obviously,
No, that makes sense.
like we'll get onto this later, but you get a large number of muscle injuries in rugby, and not all of them are contact related.
Yeah.
So they're the ones you're trying to avoid. So you end up thinking about this problem. Quite a lot, because it's one that you definitely need to get better at, not necessarily solving, but understanding. And then you can, and that's the whole thing. I think one of the best descriptions of an S&C coach I heard was from my friend I used to work with, Andre Quinn. He's like the S&C coaches are like investigators.
Yeah.
So you're trying to investigate a problem, and you're trying to provide a solution to that problem.
For so many people as well. It's
Yeah,
not
for
just
lots
like
of
a
people.
one-on-one client. Yeah.
But then that comes to another point about heuristics and the use of heuristics with a large group of people. You can't give everyone the ultimate individual program.
Yeah.
You can group people together and say, right, okay, you're more in this group than you are in that group. So this is the intervention that's going to help you the most, because you can't assess every training day, everything.
No.
There's a certain point where you have to go, right, it is about just getting this work done, but we'll push you into the right place to do the right work.
Yeah. Were there some quite common groupings that you would have using that sort of model?
Not necessarily for injury. That would be more, again, we can talk about that in a little while, I guess, the injury prevention or injury mitigation stuff. But yeah, in terms of the physical profiles, so I hope this doesn't sound too, I don't lose my way a bit when I explain this, but basically when we talk about the testing, so if we actually reverse engineer rugby and start with the game, so what are the demands of the game? And if you read a research paper on demands of rugby, it's they're all very generic, opening paragraphs about the demands of rugby, as in like a bit like what I said, it's an alactic aerobic sport or aerobic alactic sport, whatever. And the demands are, there's a certain amount of high speed running, and there's a certain amount of this, and there's a certain amount of that, and it's like that's really good to know as a surface level. This is what rugby is compared to other sports, but then you obviously want to dive much deeper into that and go, what, like we already spoke about, there's 15 players on the field, and a lot of them have very different demands.
Yeah.
As in, like, very different demands, as in some players will do certain things that other players will not even do in the game. So
yeah, true.
we need to actually start with the game and establish what are the things that each individual playing group or each position, what are the demands of each and every individual position, and then what are the physical characteristics that the better ones have against the ones who are less good.
Yeah. Still good, just not as
still
good.
good, just
Yeah.
less as good as them. So yeah, we would have had a project where we did some general notation stuff on the efforts in the game. So one, the amount of collision. So you have your GPS data. Sorry, start with that. You have GPS data. That tells you a lot about what they do when they're obviously moving around. So how far did they run? Or how far did they move? Then how far did they jog? Then how far did they run at a sort of relatively quick speed? And then how far did they sprint?
Yep.
And you can have different setups for this. You can have that as a relative setup as a relative set of data where it's based on the individual and how fast they can run and what their mass is and all the rest of it. And you've got your bandwidths there. Or you can go the other way and go, we're doing absolutes. And these are more like team metrics. So high speed is, some people use a sort of 5.5 meters per second as high speed running. Now, I personally wouldn't do that. I think that you get some people running Broncos in speeds not dissimilar to 5 meters per second. So to call that high speed running is a little bit off the mark for me.
Yeah.
But in saying that, in certain situations, so we were very lucky again, we had like flipping 50 GPS units.
Oh, and then how do they work? Do they just like clip to the t-shirt or something like that?
I've got a vest. It's like a very, very snazzy sports bra.
Nice.
Yeah, some of the boys really fill them out nicely. But yeah, so you got the sports bra, and there's a little pocket in the back, and then on the playing shirts, all the playing shirts now would have pockets in the playing shirt at the back. And that's what you can see.
That's why they have that little lump on.
The lump on the back, and so that's where it records from, and you get all of your motion data. There is obviously the companies are always working incredibly hard to try and solve the problem in its entirety. So like, can they put algorithms in to work with the accelerometer that could tell you what collisions happened and what the scale of the collision was in terms of G-force and all the rest of it. This may have changed, but I'm yet to be 100% convinced it is the holy grail of sort of monitoring a player. So we had GPS for how they move around on the field. And there's some other metrics in there as well that would be sort of bespoke to the London Irish programme, which Ben Cousins did for us, our sports scientist, doctor, very clever guy, worth talking to. And then on the other side, we did some just very, very old school notation of the game. So tackle, clean, carry. And this isn't perfect by any stretch, but it's what we went with and what we started with and what we continued on, because we thought that having a more consistent data set trumped us tweaking it all the time and trying to be like, oh, well, was it an attacking clean or, an attacking breakdown versus defensive breakdown? That's what the rugby analysts do from a technical, tactical standpoint. That's what they're looking at. How does it influence the game? We're looking at physiological output. So we need to know tackle, clean, carry, maul, scrum.
Yeah.
So how many of those events happen in the game? And then of those events, if the collision happens here, you end up this side or this side. So let's take out all of the nuance and go, right, because ultimately the game is won and lost. This is very, very basic. Won and lost on who can move their way up and down the field most effectively. Now that could obviously be, it doesn't necessarily mean that's collisions. That could be, you could tactically kick your way into the other half. But ultimately, you put a team under pressure by getting behind them and working your way over the gain line repeatedly.
Yep.
So our job as S&C coaches is definitely not to teach the fly half how to kick a 50-20. It's to give all the guys around him all of the tools that they need to get over the gain line repeatedly.
Yep.
And as much as I would love the game to be like this, there isn't the space to avoid contact. You're talking about when you see clips of like Cheslin Colby and I don't know, some of the other guys who have this unbelievable. You're talking about the one percenters within the one percenters. They are phenomenal evasion athletes.
Yeah, the guys that can just step around everyone somehow
Yeah,
and spin around and somehow get
yeah,
out of
and they're
tackles.
like,
Yeah,
if you find one, please, keep hold of them for as long as you
yeah,
can.
yeah.
But then, for the majority of rugby players, you're gonna come up against an opponent, and some collision event is going to happen, and we want you to be in a position where you can produce enough force to get yourself on the right side of that.
Yeah.
And that's just, and then when you actually look how that plays out in the game, you've got the, can the defense, if you get over the gain line and can recycle the ball quickly, the defense have to retreat, reset, where the attack just continually move forward. So you can come onto the ball with more momentum, which is obviously one of the testing things that we look at is momentum. How fast can you sprint 10 meters? How much do you weigh? What's your velocity by your mass? And then you've got momentum. And the guys with the higher momentum, funnily enough, are the ones who are better at collision events.
Yeah.
And have more
Science,
success in collision events.
So would you, using that model, would a typical groupings within a team or a squad be based on like forwards and backs, or does it get kind of more specific than that if you were to group them?
We did it based on the testing data and obviously reverse engineering from the game. So you've got a group of players who, if we were to use a rule of thumb stuff, so you've got a group of players who are have enormous momentum scores, but poor Bronco scores. So we know that from a strength, power, alactic perspective, they can produce lots of force. Their momentum is really high. They're always going to get over the gain line, but they don't do it enough.
Yeah.
So we need to put them in here because I'll talk about the why in a second. So we want them over here because we want them to do more of this. They've got this. We want them to do more of it. Then on the converse of that is the guys in like a momentum group is what we called it. But so they have incredibly high Bronco scores and aerobic ability. They get through tons of work. All their GPS metrics are through the roof. They get through tons of work in the game, more than they ever need to, but their effectiveness is down here.
Yep.
So they need to bring up their effectiveness because we know they're going to get through enough work to satisfy the demand of the game. We need that work to be of a much higher quality and impact so we can keep the whole team moving forwards. And then third group is people who have a bit of both and or their position is technically a more of a technical tactical position.
Yeah.
So if you've got a technical tactical guy, you're really looking at, right, this guy's technical tactical. How is he going to get better?
Yeah.
It's not going to be doing additional fitness and weights. It's going to be more time spent with coaches, more time analysing the game. And it's not to say they skip gym sessions and stuff. It's just what's the focus in their mind that's going to make them the best version of themselves for London Irish at the time.
Yeah.
So it's those who, if they can invest their time into becoming more astute technically, tactically, actually refining their skill sets at the sort of sharp end of the spear, they're the things that make the difference because they touch the ball more.
Yeah.
The technical tactical guys have their hands on the ball a lot more than anybody else.
Yeah. What kind of positions would fall into that?
Scrum half, fly half.
Yeah.
Possibly you could make an argument for hooker.
Yeah.
Because of the 9 times out of 10, hooker might be the sort of scrum leader.
Yeah.
So he has to make sort of decisions on, or at least lead that group. So there's the leadership aspect of this as well. And then they have to have good technical skills with the throw, obviously based a little bit around fitness, but they just have to be in a position they can execute a relatively technical skill set with composure. So that and they have to understand the line out systems. Potentially one of the line out caller as well. Potentially would be in that group.
Yeah,
but generally, I'd say generally
playmakers kind of thing.
Yeah, playmakers essentially.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, the rugby, we called it rugby transfer. Again, these terms are just what came out. They're not necessarily what I stick with forevermore. But once you're done, you're like, that'll do for now.
Yeah. Close enough.
That's what it says on the tin. we're looking for that essentially. How do we use our S&C? How do we just make the focus correct for these guys, because they've got a lot of the tools. Because I think the thing you have to understand, it doesn't mean not doing the training.
Mm.
It just means we're not going to be hyper critical and analytical about how you're tracking with that. We know that you actually can express all the things you need to express to be able to cope with the physical demands of the game.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, how do you get better?
Mm.
So let's shift their where's the spotlight for them? Because you can't be broad on everything forever.
Yeah.
You have to come in and be like, right, this will make me better. I'm still going to do all that stuff, so it's not going to detrain and disappear. But I need to, if you've got a guy who runs a sub 4.5 minute Bronco, they do it every single preseason. Their metrics are through the roof in training, through the roof in games. Why on God's green earth would you do additional fitness with them?
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
Complete waste of time. Yeah.
So for someone like that, maybe if we could delve into either of those two camps a little bit more. So someone with a really good cardiovascular system, but who needs to increase their power and their velocity and their strength, what would a typical kind of training plan or structure look like for that group?
It's very similar. It's just again a coach's preference, as in the S&C coach that they work with. Right, you've been set a task to, your group need to improve momentum. So they need to what physical qualities are going to improve momentum. Well, we know strength. They're probably going to be lacking in general, like limit strength. So we know there's going to be a lack of limit strength, and because there's a lack of limit strength, there's a lack of power.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lack of like stiffness qualities and other things like that. So that's probably where you're going to spend your time doing basic barbell work. And it's not to say they do extra anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the focus. And it's like the assumption that every single player will walk into the gym and have this sort of like laser-like focus about lifting as heavy as possible and really, going to the well. They don't. Like, it's not, again, dealing with people, not machines. So like as much as that would be amazing that they all came in, because we're on that page, aren't we? We're like, yeah, we'd love to see everyone come in and be like, this is the best session of the day.
yeah.
But the reality is they're not. And it's just about that. Like, can you give them the focus they need to work on the things they need to work on? And if you can relate it back to the game, helps. But yeah, so their training week would look very similar. Right. One thing they probably would do different that they did with Derek, who ran that program, and he was brilliant for that because his background was obviously sprinting, did a bit of weightlifting himself, not competition, but he would train that way. But it's very much like, right, if we're going to do this, we need to keep it simple. Mm-hmm. So basic barbell movements, and let's do, get our fives done, work down to threes, twos, work back up to fives, but very unsympathetic towards the I'm tired crowd, or I'm not really into this, or I'm getting bored. Literally go through that. So yeah, like, and that's what you need for that, because that basically is what's gonna move the dial. Is a lot of the same, and it's not to lump people all in the same boat here, but like generally speaking, the guys who were in that group weren't big on weights.
That's interesting. I would have thought it would be the same, but I guess
sorry to cut across you. When I say not big on weights, I mean they would come in, do their weights, they enjoy their weights, but for them, a weight session is how can I shorten up the rest, and how can I leave the gym literally pumping with sweat, exhausted. And that's not strength. Yeah. That's not strength power. No. Strength power is actually being able to give an effort and can you rest for 5 minutes? Yeah. Can you just sit there and not move? They struggle with that. They're almost like they're like twitching. They can't sit still for 5 seconds. They want to do work. Where conversely, the guys in the work rate group would be very different. They would, it's like pulling teeth trying to get them to get to the bar. Come on, mate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's slightly different. And again, that's very general, but that seemed to be the way that they were wired for the things that, and then you could maybe look at that and go, well, that's probably why they were good at the thing they were good at. Yeah. They do the things they enjoy, exactly, and they are sort of genetically probably predisposed to be good at.
Yeah, and for the other group that are already good with the momentum and strength and power, but needed to work on their cardiovascular, ratio of their weights to cardio also be relatively similar as the other group, or would they have a increased amount
Yeah,
of
they
cardiovascular work?
so if we look at, they would have an increased volume generally across the
Yeah.
board, but then they might still be able to do that in the same time frame.
Yeah.
So you obviously reduce your rest periods. You get a slightly different adaptive response to the training, and then using off-feet methods within the same time period. So could they do what they were doing by the end was their weight session, which still had elements of strength power in, but then certain bits near the back end that were more, probably class them as circuit-based stuff. And then they would do some sort of anaerobic glycolytic type work at the very end. So very, very high intensity, very, very low dose. And because they've already done, you factor in, it's all well and good looking at the stuff in isolation, but they've already done 90 minutes of rugby, plus extras, plus all the rest of it. So it's like, what can you get done? What energy pathway? What have you not ticked off? What's the limiting factor? So yeah, that's where we went with those guys. That was a guy called Guy Lewis who ran that. Did a bit of so his background would have been more like MMA fighting. So that they, again, I think our own biases come into this as to what we choose, but I think it was quite good for rugby players because it's like this guy, again, buy into the program. This guy used to fight people in a cage, so he clearly has been to the well. He's been to some dark places to get himself ready for that. So there's an immediate sort of trust that he gets it.
Yeah.
Where probably for me, they would have always thought, you don't do any of this, Rob. And I'd be like, you're absolutely right. I do not do any of this.
Yeah.
And it seems a little bit, as much as it doesn't mean you don't know the program won't work. I do think that that buy into the person who delivers it is very, very important.